Welcome back to Lippincott Talk. I am your host, Josiah Lippincott. Today, we are going to talk about the economics of AI and about universal basic income, why I am opposed. The inspiration for today's show came from Elon Musk. Musk tweeted out earlier today that universal high income via checks issued by the federal government is the best way to deal with unemployment caused by AI. AI/robotics will produce goods and services far in excess of the increase in the money supply, so there will not be inflation. So Elon's tweet idea is that, for one, presumes that technology will cause unemployment, but that the solution to this is a government program. Ultimately, I don't think this will end up being Elon's true view. He's kind of all over the place ideologically in a lot of ways. But I want to just talk about the idea he's articulating here. This is not unique to him. Prior to the Iran war and all the panic and freaking out over that and, boobery involved there, prior to that, there was a lot of hyperventilating about AI. There was an article written on X called "Something Big is Happening," which talked about how AI was going to cause mass unemployment among white-collar workers, and this was going to transform the economy. It went super viral, like 100 million plus hits. It was a real, and I think ultimately false argument that was being made there, but it got a lot of traction. And you can see that arguments over AI and technology have really been a hobby horse for the left. That they are latching on to the idea that data centers are bad, they're using up all of the water. AI is a threat to humanity, to art, to individual communication. And this is a pretty decisive or pretty widespread view, especially on the left. And I think it's ultimately a problem. I think it's false. The main purpose of today's show is to argue that AI is not a big political issue. It really doesn't matter. It's not something, if you care about politics, you should be focused on other problems. This is not something to waste a lot of energy thinking about. The main, again, we have real problems in this country. Nothing I'm about to say denies that fact, but I do want to be clear. There are some things that really just aren't an issue, and unemployment caused by AI is not a big deal. In fact, I'm a moderate. I think I'm bullish on AI. I think it can deliver a lot of results. I've been really impressed by what I've seen out of some of these tools. I think it will ultimately allow for a real expansion of prosperity. I think that's great. I want that, I want the economy to do well because I want Trump to continue with his domestic agenda. I want Republicans to keep the House and Senate in the midterms. So I am a big supporter of economic growth and low prices and technological development. Why? Because I like prosperity from a personal perspective. I like having money. I like it when my neighbors have money. There's things I want for my kids, for myself, for my wife, and I like that. On the other hand, I also like just having a happier country. I feel like Americans have gotten kicked in the teeth quite a bit over the last 6 years, especially, and we deserve to have good things. And I think technological growth and development could deliver. That doesn't mean there won't be problems. There's lots of ways. There's government regulation and inflation and monetary policy, and I'm going to set that aside for now. But the key thing I really want to drill down on today is the idea that I want to oppose the idea that technology creates a lower standard of living. I also want to push back on the idea that the government needs to solve the problems created by technology. It does not. This idea has been with us since the beginning of the progressive era. It has been bad for the American people. It has resulted in ruinous fiscal policies. It has resulted in social degradation, the harm to the family, to individuals. It has also connected to mass migration. And it's ultimately a leftist view. And so the main thing I just really want to hammer home is economically, do not buy into these arguments. Stay away. If you are a conservative, if you are on the right, if you're just a patriotic American, do not get sucked into this nonsense about how technology is this huge problem that needs to be solved by an expansion of state power. That is going to go nowhere good. And it ultimately is not the case that we're threatened by AI. doesn't mean there won't be problems associated with AI. There will be some, but there's problems associated with human life as such. And I just kind of want to point out that's reality, right? You know, there's a lot of wonderful things that have improved in our lives. I'm really grateful for, the way that cell phone technology allows for me to communicate with my family. I think it's really important. I don't, live really close to my parents and to my brothers, but I can stay in touch with them really easily. That's awesome. But it's true, by having a cell phone, sometimes I get spam calls. And when cell phones weren't everywhere, you didn't have spam calls. So it's true, technological development has come with some annoying things that are accompanied by the cell phone, right? That's just the reality and the nature of human life, is that you solve a problem, but there are problems that come with the solution. That's just in the nature of things. And you have to make peace with reality. In fact, I think that's one of the most right-wing traits you can have, is making peace with the world as it is. Instead of dreaming and becoming resentful about the world not being the way you think it should be. Resentment is a fundamentally left-wing trait. And on that, I want to talk a little bit about Karl Marx, because Marx is, in my mind, the thinker who most clearly associates technology with decline. The idea that technology itself lends itself to a lower standard of living and to harm for ordinary people and for workers. So I'll just quote from the Communist Manifesto here. Quote, owing to the extensive use of machinery and to the division of labor, the work of the proletarians has lost all individual character and consequently all charm for the workman. He becomes an appendage of the machine, and it is only the most simple, most monotonous, and most easily acquired knack that is required of him. Hence, the cost of production of a workman is restricted almost entirely to the means of subsistence that he requires for his maintenance and for the propagation of his race. But the price of a commodity, and therefore also of labor, is equal to its cost of production. In proportion, therefore, as the repulsiveness of the work increases, the wage decreases. Nay, more, in proportion as the use of machinery and division of labor increases, in the same proportion the burden of toil also increases, whether by prolongation of the working hours, by increase of the work exacted in a given time, or by increased speed of the machinery, etc. And then later on in the manifesto, Marx says, quote, no sooner is the exploitation of the laborer by the manufacturer so far at an end that he receives his wages in cash than he is set upon by the other portions of the bourgeoisie, the landlord, the shopkeeper, the pawnbroker, etc., the lower strata of the middle class, the small tradespeople, shopkeepers, retired tradesmen generally, the handicraftsmen and peasants. All these sink gradually into the proletariat, partly because their diminutive capital does not suffice for the scale on which modern industry is carried on, and is swamped in the competition with the large capitalists, partly because their specialized skill is rendered worthless by the new methods of production. Thus, the proletariat is recruited from all classes of the population. Okay, so Marx's argument is that technology lowers the standard of living. It makes life worse for the worker. Eventually, the conditions for the worker get so bad that they engage in revolution, they overthrow the capitalists, and then they take the technological innovations that have been developed by the capitalists and they appropriate them for themselves, and then you get utopia, and everything's awesome. And then you don't have a state, family, etc., blah, blah, blah. That's the key. But for Marx, there's the belief that individual workers are harmed by technological growth and that they lose their wholesome Chungus way of living, and they lose that, and they're alienated from their labor, and they lose their sense of who they are. And then this can be welded to cultural critiques like the atomized individual created by capitalist systems of oppression, blah, 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 blah. You can't swing a dead cat in a humanities program without hitting this kind of argument. This is like, you can find people like this all over Substack. They're everywhere, right? This is, and it's an idea that is mostly on the left, though has gotten more purchase among conservatives recently. And there are reasons for that. And I think some of it is there are real social problems, but they're not the byproduct fundamentally of technology. One of my crusades, or what I want to focus on, is the extent to which political choices, the law, policy, legislatures, police departments, judiciary, courts, the way in which those actual real manifestations of political power affect our lives and shape social and cultural trends. And one of the most important lessons I can teach or I can offer is that you need to know facts. So often, it is so easy to just sit there and commentate on society without distinguishing the real chain of cause and effect that leads to a given problem. So, a great example is immigration. Immigration policy is bound up in the law. So, if you're talking about economics and the market, you got to set that aside. You need to look at the actual literal law in the United States. How does that system work? What are the ideas that animate that system? What Marx gets wrong, and it's tied in part to what Musk gets wrong, is the idea that technology itself is the cause of a bunch of social problems, or that in and of itself creates unemployment that needs to be solved with some sort of government policy. For Marx, the government policy is global revolution. For Musk, it's taxation that will lead to checks being mailed out to unemployed people. So there's a key difference there. And so again, Musk is not a doctrinaire Marxist. The left would, assassinate that guy if they could, or at least there are some on the left who would. If you're a real true believer, someone like Musk is not going to make it through the revolution. So by no means do I want to imply that that Musk is a communist or something like that. The problem is the ideas that he's playing with or that he's indulging lend themselves to empowering the left in terms of making some of their arguments for them. And I don't think that's something that we should do. Again, you have to think, what is technology, right? Like what, and also what is economics about? Let's start there. What is economics about? Fundamentally, human beings long for happiness. And our problem is we are finite mortal beings. We want to have the good and we want to have it forever. So we want a never-ending stream of good things. But the problem is we have finite resources and we're aging and then we die. So we long for the good, but we can't have it, or we can only have a part of it. And that's a source of a lot of sorrow for human beings. And our labor is motivated by the fact that we want to alleviate our suffering, right? We want good things. And we want to take away pains and replace them with pleasures. And pleasure comes in many, many forms. You can have the pleasure of friendship. You can have pleasure of eating, the pleasure of seeing your children grow up and have lives of their own, the pleasure of friendship, very important, conversation. All of those goods require resources to acquire, right? You can't just, wish that you would have good things in your life. You need to go out and work. And the problem with the left is that they are at war with that reality, right? And that's the source of resentment. And that resentment is ultimately, I think, the true heart of Marxist and left-wing thought. Weaponized resentment. So, again, technological development, insofar as we have it, is able to solve problems, but in reality, there are still more problems to be solved. If AI is able to, let's say, and again, this is where people go nuts, and I can just use a practical example. Every year, I looked up the numbers, Americans spend $200 billion on cancer treatments and research. $200 billion. There are 14,500 oncologists in America, making $200 billion a year. Let's say a big AI data center, hyperscaler, they do it. They solve cancer as a problem. Okay, so that means the $200 billion that Americans had been spending on cancer research will go away. So won't all because there's no more cancer. This will just be solved. We can solve it. Let's say it's just an easy $1 solution. We're going to fantasize for a moment. The solution that we get is it just costs $1 and you can cure any cancer anywhere in the world. So what's a $1 shot? Boom, problem gone away. Well, what happens to those oncologists? Won't they all lose their jobs? Won't they lose their standard of living? Oh my goodness, we've lost $200 billion worth of spending. And the reality, of course, is who in their right mind would prevent a cure from cancer from coming into being just to save the jobs of doctors who treat cancer? right? That doesn't make any sense. The happiness that you gain from, being able to keep your loved ones, right? Save your own life or the life of someone who has a terminal cancer diagnosis is the happiness that individuals and human beings get from that is so very high and so very valuable. We would be so immensely fortunate to live in a world like that. It is absolutely worth it to have that technological development. And the reality is, you're going to have some unemployed oncologists in that scenario. But you've also saved $200 billion a year that you were paying in cancer treatments, right? Because you've solved the problem. So that $200 billion can be reinvested somewhere else in the economy. And there you have the people who used to be oncologists can now go do those jobs, right? So there's just a shifting of production. But in our dream scenario here, not only have you cured cancer, you also save the $200 billion. So you have the cure for cancer and $200 billion, where before you had spent $200 billion on marginally effective cancer treatments, right? So every savings that's generated through a gain in efficiency by solving a problem, that's all that means. You've just solved the problem, made it easier to solve or acquire a good thing. Every single time you do that, you create excess resources that can be reinvested somewhere else. You can take time, attention, resources, and money and put them into a new problem. And when you do that, you get economic growth. And that's why, solutions compound on solutions. What we call compounding interest is just human beings using the solutions to old problems as the foundation of new solutions to new problems. That's what that is. That's what causes economic growth. And it's all motivated by the human search for happiness. So the great news is that worrying about technology doesn't really make sense. It's like, since the Communist Manifesto was written till now, we've seen a major increase in the standard of living across the board. This is trite at this point, but poor people in America have smartphones, right? They have air conditioning. They have refrigeration. We take for granted a standard of living that was unimaginable 100 years ago. When my grandmother was a girl, she didn't always have enough food to eat every day. She was living in rural Kansas, okay, and this is the 1940s and 50s, but the reality was their supply of food was a lot more volatile because they had to grow it themselves. They had to work really hard to get just the basics of life. And it doesn't mean that their lives were all horrible or something, and they had a lot of good things. And that obviously they had strong family values, they had a strong religious community, but they also had real hard economic challenges. And there were genuine concerns about, at some point for my great-grandparents, about whether or not they could, afford to feed their children. They might need to send them off to relatives because they were having trouble with the harvest and with just the problems of trying to acquire enough resources to live. So I'm really glad we're not living in that world. That's great, right? And I would love to see technological development. Personally, I'd love to see Alzheimer's get cured. I think that'd be awesome. I don't know if any of you in the audience have ever known someone who has Alzheimer's or early onset Alzheimer's in particular, but it's a terrible disease. And our lives would be a lot better if that problem got solved. And the truth is, of course, that there's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there who could come up with fraudulent cures. You have medical research that ends up being destructive. You'd have doctors engage in lying. The solutions to some of these problems are often very painful. The trade-offs are very high. But the truth is, the reality is, when you use your mind to solve problems, you can stack those solutions over time. And that's why life gets better. And that's a good thing, ultimately. There are real problems, but there's also good things as well. And one of the easiest ways to keep getting sucked into the radical left is to just have a little gratitude in your life. Just reject resentment. And I'm working on that myself. I think it's a powerful spiritual protection. Resentment is the ultimate driving force behind the left, and you should avoid it. And that just means taking a moment to be grateful for the good things you have. Of course, by the same token, we have a lot of problems. And, the problem of the collapse of the family, you've got economic problems. Americans are having trouble affording homes, especially younger Americans. You've got divorce law is a mess. Family courts are a mess. You've got mass migration. And that's creating a lot of social and cultural tension. You have the radical left trying to rip up the nation's history. You have, we had political assassination of Charlie Kirk. That was a really shocking problem that we've suddenly had. The attempted assassinations of Trump. There are real, you have law and order issues. You've got addiction problems. There are real problems in America. And they're problems that should be solved. They are, in almost every case, tied directly to political choices. So again, I want to reiterate, when people focus time and energy thinking about AI and its effect on the economy and, oh my goodness, what will happen to unemployment, they're not thinking about real, genuine political problems that they could solve easily. It's like the AI thing is not a problem, right? Like, let's say accounting gets solved and the accountants get new jobs. Don't care, right? That's a good thing, actually. When you see, like, part of what it takes to have a free country is to accept that if someone does a job better than you, then it's okay, right? That doesn't entitle you to use violence against them. Theft is not productive. It is not good. When you see someone else succeeding and they're better at you than something, that's a good thing, right? And I say this, and that's a habit that I want to cultivate, in part because A, it's good for my spiritual health, but B, it's also good for the society at large. It's good for my neighbors, right? It's good for me. There are things I'm really good at. And it's bad if other people were to see something I'm good at and then justify taking what's mine precisely because I'm talented, because I have succeeded in a given area. And again, peace and prosperity go together, and theft and resentment are inimical to that peace and prosperity. And again, those are animating drives for the left and should be avoided. We should encourage productivity, reason, property rights, protection of person and property. Those are fundamentally conservative or right-wing policies. And again, there's all kinds of problems I could point to, and I'm not the first person to say any of this by any stretch of the imagination. But again, savings generated from technology get reinvested in new lines of production. People who used to work in one industry work in another one, right? Was a big kerfuffle, I don't know if kerfuffle is the wrong word. Tucker Carlson said something a few years ago, I think in an interview with Ben Shapiro, where he was talking about how he wants to protect truckers from robotic drivers. And in reality, that isn't necessary, right? It could be the case, and it could be the case soon, that machines will be able to transport goods more efficiently than human beings, at least in, across roadways. And the ultimate reality of lowering transportation costs would be to generate savings, which generates more investment, which generates more need for transportation, which will probably end up in higher purchasing power for people who drive trucks in the future. There will still be a need for the marginal value of human labor for transportation jobs. But let's say you live in a world where that isn't the case. Technology is so good and so efficient that you don't have a need for truckers any longer. The reality will be that the savings generated in that world will be high enough to benefit the whole country, right? As prices go down, you'll just see more and more reinvestment across the economy in new lines of production. And that's something I want, right? I want truck drivers, like I want every other American, to have a better, higher standard of living. I want that for myself. The parents of truck drivers in many cases were farmers or craftsmen or carpenters or whatever else, and now they're working as in transportation. And my hope is that their children will have an even higher and better standard of living. They'll have better jobs. And again, so much of this, and this is something there's a lot of error around this, and I would say even for myself, I've been confused on this in the past. But the key point is, you don't create a higher standard of living through communist redistribution schemes, right? The redistribution of income through government programs does not create wealth. It doesn't make our lives better. It makes them worse. You empower bureaucrats. They're all leftists, right? And you've given them power to extract resources from people who are hardworking and talented and give them to people who are not, or who are privileged class of some kind. So that kind of wealth transfer is bad in a number of ways. For one, it can take people who would otherwise be productive and it rewards them in doing nothing, which is really harmful for their soul. It makes their lives worse because whereas they had the opportunity to do so much for others, now they've just given up on life, and they can sustain that because there's a check in the mail every month. So instead of making friends and being productive and having a healthy relationship, now they're not. And in other cases, you just have outright fraud. So I would say this has been a shift in my thinking, is that I increasingly just see the welfare state as the enemy of, what's good and healthy in the country. And I oppose that. I don't want that. I don't want that from my neighbors. I want genuine prosperity. I don't want to empower the left. I don't want to empower people who hate me. I want to empower productivity and friendship among Americans. And that means respecting property rights. It means not enshrining theft as a fundamental principle into our way of life or into our government. So again, I hope this all makes sense, and again, so often these arguments are made in a way that will treat like people who are poor as if it's all their fault. That is not the case. And I'm not saying that here. There's a lot of poverty in America. There's a lot of despair too. That is real. It is real. And just because someone has a cell phone and refrigerator doesn't mean that they're happy. Right? Our problems are a lot deeper than that. Like, it's nice to have refrigerated food. It's nice to have a cell phone. That doesn't mean that's going to solve all of your problems. By no means. But looking at the real causes of those problems, again, so often political. Think of just how much damage is done by divorce law in this country. The fact that people can just, a partner can just blow up their marriage, abandon their kids, and it's just, whatever, right? Then, that's fine. It's as if the kids aren't entitled to a stable home, or that can just be tossed aside. It's like, no, that's not right. And I think it's done a lot of ruin for the good of the American people and, for their happiness. But that can be solved through law, and that's not something you're going to solve by talking about AI. Like, AI is not going to make, it's not going to get you a girlfriend and provide stable marriages across the country, right? It can't do that. That's not what these machines are doing or what they're aiming for right now. So we will have real problems. AI might be able to have some crime fighting power, but the reality is crime is ultimately a political choice. And think about how much better our lives would be if we had real law and order. You just had people committing rape, murder, theft, and were punished. Right now, the system oftentimes is very lenient. Lots of opportunities for people who are fundamentally antisocial. I see this around Hillsdale, Michigan, right? There's been, in one case, there was an attempted shooting here in town. Jeremiah DeMichael Brody opened fire in a drug deal gone wrong outside the library here in the town. And he was a felon in possession of a firearm. I think he did attempted kidnapping because he chased down the people he was shooting at and then ran a different set of people off the road. So multiple felonies, double attempted homicide, drug dealing, the whole 9 yards. You know what he got out of that? Probation, right? That's a political choice. So when people talk about AI and water usage and blah, blah, and oh my God, what will happen to the jobs of accountants if a machine does it better? Okay. All of that, all that will solve itself. That's just in the course of ordinary people thinking about their lives and how to get a job, right? There's lots of ways that problem will get solved. The political problem is a different thing entirely. You have people running around committing attempted homicide who are getting probation. That's a political choice. That's something the government actually can do something about, and it's not. You see that, and this is just a microcosm of problems all over the country. And again, what I'm calling for is focus. I want there to be focus. I want the American right and conservatives to be locked into the very real problems that we face. Worrying about universal basic income, for one, gives credence to the left. That's bad. B, it's not even worth worrying about, right? Like this is stuff grows. Like the Marxist arguments for how technology makes the lives of workers worse is wrong. That's just not the case. American workers and their standard of living have gone up. In fact, thinking of people who have a job as workers simply is incorrect. In one sense, the worker is, you're working for someone else. You're also, you own capital in this form of your body and your tools, your mind. You can use those things to acquire resources through exchange. So the worker is a capitalist. They're an entrepreneur because they can choose which kind of business to work for. If there's all these technical legal definitions for tax purposes. Set all that aside in your mind. An entrepreneur is someone who foresees their own benefit from doing work and exchanging their labor in exchange, for some good. So they're solving a problem by speculating about the future and the desires of others, and they solve that problem through labor. So when you get a job, the janitor is an entrepreneur. A janitor at a gas station is an entrepreneur. He's like, people want to have clean bathrooms. I'm going to clean the bathroom in exchange for money. There's a market for bathroom cleaning services. Okay. Again, a lot of the Marxist way of thinking is just wrong. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. Like, the worker gets his, he gets his paycheck and then he saves it. Okay, now he's a capitalist because he's got capital. Present means to future ends. He's got tools now. Okay, the worker, I thought there was this big division. But in reality, they're all one in the same individual. And it's just a matter of scale. And the best thing you can do to have a free and prosperous country is enforce the law. Don't let in hostile foreigners who want to upend your way of life. And then make sure that you're not harming people, right? You're not stealing from them. That's it. Whoa, what a thought. What about just protecting the people instead of harming them? That's a crazy idea. And it is, because so often you look at the stuff that bureaucrats and the government are doing, and it's nuts. Does not benefit Americans in any way whatsoever, right? So universal basic income is not necessary. There will still be economic growth after AI. There will still be jobs. We will still have to work, for better or worse. There will be more problems to solve. There will still be a value to the marginal productivity of labor. There will be a place even for people who aren't that smart. Again, this is a big argument you hear a lot. Oh, dumb people won't have a role in the future economy. They will. They will. In fact, there has never been a time in history where people of below average intelligence can be more productive than they are now. Why? Because there are so many tools that can compensate for deficiencies that human beings have. And so really, most human beings today can be economically productive. The reason they're not is connected to a whole host of other things. In some ways, productivity allows for people to not do stuff. They can just accept a really low standard of living and just kind of, live like a bump on the log. And you see that happening in a lot of different places. This is common. It's not good. Yeah. And again, a lot of these economic issues are tied up in political problems, and it can be difficult to disentangle them. But the biggest takeaway I want to have for the show today is don't freak out about stuff like this. Don't freak out about the technology thing. Don't give credence to left-wing arguments about technology. Stay focused on the real problems. Stay focused. That's it. Don't become a psychic casualty. I cannot emphasize that enough. Keep your mind clear. Stay focused. Stay on the straight and narrow. Anyway, I think it's a good time to bring the show to a close. I want to thank you all for listening. As always, be sure to follow me Substack, Regime Critic. You can follow me on YouTube at Lippincott Talk. And you can also follow me on X at @JLippincott_. Thank you again for listening. You are the reason I do this. And again, this is Lippincott Talk. I'm your host, Josiah Lippincott. Keep the faith.